God, I feel like talking about moms on this channel is starting to become my brand, but honestly, I'm more than okay with that. We got a lot of really awesome cartoon moms or maternal figures in recent shows lately, and I personally am all here for it. So anyways, the mom that I wanted to talk about today is the Owl House's very own Camila Noceda. Camila is the mother to the protagonist, Luz Noceda, and recently within the Owl House fandom, not a large portion of it, but enough to where it's become concerning, a lot of people are claiming that she's abusive towards Luz. Now, abusive parents or paternal figures are nothing new in children's media. I mean, you have the likes of Gabriel Agreste from Miraculous Ladybug, and even within the Owl House itself, there's also Amity's parents and Emperor Bellows. Now, I do recognize that a large portion of the fandom who is active and discussing the potential of abuse between these two characters are children, and so they may not know any better. The purpose of this video isn't to accost or make anyone feel bad for feeling this way or making the connection, but rather to educate and let people know the difference between a parent who has made a mistake versus a parent who is actually and legitimately abusive. Because yes, there is a massive difference. It goes without saying not to harass or be mean to anyone who is making this comparison. It's very important then when talking about these subjects that you do your research, because improperly using terms and throwing them around with reckless abandon ends up watering them down and making it harder for abuse victims to come forward with their stories. You should always look up the definition of something before stating that's what a character is going through, just as a rule of thumb. And no, one of those quote-unquote educational Twitter threads shouldn't be your main source of information. Twitter, in general, shouldn't be a source for anything unless you're quoting somebody, since literally anyone on there can post whatever and act as if it's a fact. Case in point, the reason I felt the need to make this video. Quick content disclaimer as well, but if abuse, and more specifically parental abuse, is triggering for you, now would be a good time to click off of the video. Due to the nature of what I'm talking about here, I do need to go more in depth with terms and instances of actual abuse. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started.
Are you okay? Hey, forget what that girl said. I know what it's like to want to run away from home. I did the same thing. You and I are not the same. You had a mom that loved you, a home, a life. You had it good, and you still wanted to run away.
You chose to stay there?
Oh,
Were you trying to live out some witch fantasy? Did you hate living with me that much?
Mama, no! It's not you. It never was.
Promise me, Luz, please.
Okay, Mom. I promise. I didn't have a choice.
So, a little bit of backstory is necessary here in order for us to fully dive into the relationship of Luz and her mother, Camila. Luz and Camila live in a small town in Connecticut, and it's just the two of them. The whereabouts of Luz's father is unknown, as he's never been mentioned in the context of the show before. We see a picture of him with his face blurred out in Yesterday's Lie, but as we've had no mention of him, it's safe to assume that he's out of the picture. We're not sure if that's by divorce, death, disappearance, etc. This will be important for later in the video, but all of the context that we need to know for right now is that Camila is a single mother raising Luz on her own. In the very first episode of the show titled A Lying Witch and a Warden, Luz is introduced in a very, well, interesting way. It's revealed that she's been taken to the principal's office due to her quote-unquote book report causing physical harm to the other students. The book that she was doing a report on, The Good Witch Azura, features Azura fighting a serpentine creature, eventually defeating it and concluding the book. In order to mimic this event, Luz brings in live snakes to reenact the event from a visual standpoint, and two of the snakes end up attacking and biting her fellow students. And while these snakes obviously weren't venomous, snake bites are still incredibly dangerous. While rare, it's possible for someone to go into anaphylactic shock from a dry or non-venomous bite. There's also the risk of infection, and beyond that, it's just painful and dangerous for both the reptile and the person being bitten. Needless to say, this isn't something that Luz should have done and is incredibly irresponsible. She was even planning on setting off likely illegal fireworks inside of the building as a finale to her report, which would have been even more potentially life-threatening, because in that instance, you have a closed-in room with inadequate ventilation and a lot of people in one room with minimal places to take cover from explosives. It's a good thing that she was stopped before she was able to light them, because that could have ended in disaster. We also learn that this isn't the first time that Luz has caused discomfort to her fellow classmates and school staff. While the snakes and fireworks were definitely the most extreme case that we're aware of, she's also seen scaring her classmates with her actions and in general taking things a little too far over the top. She's so enthralled with the fantasy world that's in her stories that she has a hard time distinguishing between what's acceptable in said hypothetical world versus her own. Camila even states that she loves that her daughter is so creative, but that she sometimes goes a little too far with her creativity. And as someone who is a weird kid, I gotta agree with Camila on this one. There's a difference between being perceived as weird by your classmates versus putting them in dangerous and increasingly distressing situations. I mean, it wasn't like this was a case of Luz reciting anime quotes or showing them her AMVs. And it is worth mentioning before discussing this any further that Luz is canonically neurodivergent. The creator confirmed this in an interview with the YouTuber It's Rebecca Rose.
I kind of want to take back what I said. I said, it wasn't my intention to give Luz ADHD, and that's still the case, but it was absolutely my intention to make Luz neurodivergent. But back in 2016, 2017, when I was first working with that character, I had never heard that word before. So after doing some research and looking up that word and just seeing it more and talking to people about it, yeah, Luz is absolutely neurodivergent. And people who see her with ADHD, yeah, she has ADHD, but it's obviously doesn't hinder her. She learns a little differently. She's very visual, and she likes doing a lot of things at once. She's interested in a lot of things, and that's a boon to her. And it's a boon to people around her who can learn how to do things a little differently from her.
Now, for those of you who don't know, neurodivergent is the term that's used to describe anyone who is considered to be neurologically atypical. I cover this more in depth in my videos that I've made about autism, but I'll do a short recap of the definition here. The term neurodivergent includes people with conditions such as a personality disorder, dyscalculia, Tourette's, etc. It's essentially an umbrella term made for anyone who doesn't want to disclose the disability or disorder that they have, while still having conversations about the troubles and discrimination that they face, since there does happen to be a considerable amount of overlap in how we're treated. In this case, what Donna was specifically referring to in terms of disability was ADHD and ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. In Luz's case, it's pretty much widely agreed upon that she has ADHD specifically. Neurodivergent kids tend to be the ones who are bullied in school because they're the quote-unquote weird kid. While not the focus of this video, Luz does display a lot of very clear neurodivergent traits. She has a special interest or hyperfixation on the good witch Azura and the supernatural, has difficulty reading her classmates' pretty clear social cues, and has trouble making friends and connecting with others her age. While neurodivergency isn't anything to be ashamed of, sometimes it does and can cause problems in school. This is more on the school system for being incredibly ableist and unaccommodating, but that's a whole different conversation for another day that I do not feel like having right now. Suffice to say, ADHD and ASD are classified as disabilities for a reason. While things like special interests and hyperfixations are generally harmless for the most part, they can cause discomfort for other people who you are interacting with, as well as cause trouble for yourself. Now, generally speaking, putting somebody through some level of discomfort is fine and is to be expected. A lot of unlearning bigotry, for example, is uncomfortable. However, you do need to take those steps in order to better yourself. It's the same case wherein some discomfort may be required to unlearn harmful stereotypes that you may have against neurodivergent people. Stimming, for example, is highly stigmatized when in reality it is largely unharmful and a soothing action. However, in the case of Luz, that wasn't what was happening here. If you're making your classmates uncomfortable to the point of them running away and screaming, there is a problem that needs to be addressed there, even if you had no malicious intent behind your actions and were just trying to be funny. Intent does not excuse nor change how the action may have been perceived by others. And I could see how to a group of 14-year-olds disembowelment and inside-out eyelids would scare them or make them uncomfortable. It may be cool to Luz, but it's important for her to respect and understand her classmates' boundaries. Now, I'm not blaming Luz here. She's a neurodivergent child and she should be judged as such. Meaning, she really shouldn't be judged too harshly, if at all. Kids should be allowed the room to make mistakes and learn from them, and it drives me up a wall when they aren't. Especially when in the case of Luz is having a hard time understanding social cues, because she may not understand that she's making her classmates uncomfortable until it's brought up to her when she's in the principal's office. This is something that she likely may need help with from an external source and isn't something that she's going to know how to recognize automatically. Ideally, other students would also be taught how to interact and communicate with somebody who has trouble picking up on signals, but from a realistic standpoint, that often doesn't end up happening. So the responsibility falls on Camila to help her in the right decision, since she is the adult responsible for her in this situation. And unfortunately, when it gets to the point of multiple students having incidents with one child, dangerous or not, parents need to make tough decisions that keep both their child and those interacting with their child safe. In this case, Camila's response was sending Luz away to a camp that would quote-unquote reform her behavior and teach her how to interact with others quote-unquote normally. While on surface level this does seem like something horrible to do to your child, you need to keep in mind the entire context of this situation. Again, this wasn't a case of Luz simply having different interests than the other children and therefore finding it difficult to connect with them. If that were the case, sending her to camp would be inappropriate. Her mother wasn't upset with her for being weird, and she didn't want her to change herself to conform to be like everyone else. She was also concerned with the premise of Luz having no friends, when companionship is something that is incredibly important, especially at the critical age that she's at in life currently. She's happy that they're close and that they have each other, but it isn't healthy to either party to only have one support system. Because if that's the case, what do you do if something happens to them? I mean, we haven't seen it in this cartoon, but we have definitely seen it in Infinity Train, and let me tell you, that's a whole thing. Now, could this situation have been handled better? Absolutely. It does sort of suck that Camila gave her a warning that the next time something like this happens, she may have to send her away for the summer, and she lost that chance to correct her behavior seconds later when the snake bit her principal. It's possible that Luz was never told that she was making people uncomfortable prior and she just didn't know. So yes, I could see how it'd be unfair from that standpoint. But I honest to God don't feel like any parent in Camila's situation could have handled it without some margin of error. And regardless of how she handled it, it would likely always lead to Luz feeling as if it were an unfair situation, and by extension, the audience feeling similarly, as they're more likely to relate with Luz rather than Camila. I think that this is where the confusion comes in, because yes, it is an unfair situation to be in, but it's unfair to both Camila and Luz, as Luz is being sent away to camp and Camila needs to watch her daughter suffer while she's trying to make the right decisions regarding her. On her own, and without Luz's father, might I add. It wasn't as if she wanted to send her daughter away and have her change who she was as a person just to fit in. And I would argue that changing her to conform wasn't even the end goal so much as the goal was to teach Luz about respecting boundaries. Which yes, she does have a legitimate issue with even on the boiling aisles. But again, when you're in a situation where your child is struggling to get along with others, you need to make less than favorable decisions to keep them safe and set them on the right path. She's not a bad or abusive mother for being concerned about both her daughter's welfare and future and attempting to help her and correct her behavior regarding that. Good kids make mistakes and make people uncomfortable because they don't know any better. And similarly to Camila, that doesn't make Luz a bad kid. And I hope it doesn't seem like I'm harping on Luz too hard here, because I love her as a character and I don't think that she's a bad kid. I don't think that she makes people uncomfortable on purpose either. She's just very eccentric and loves to share things that she's passionate about with others. That's not a bad quality to have. She just needs to learn to find a healthy balance, which is something that comes with age. Finding a healthy balance doesn't mean that you need to stop liking what you like or doing what you love, which she does seem to feel like that's what it means, as evidenced by her throwing away her fantasy book before she's about to leave for camp.
Mija, your fantasy world is holding you back. Do you have any friends? Real ones. Not imagined or drawn or reptilian. Summer camp is a chance to make some friends, but you have to try. Can you do that?
Yes, Mom.
One of the overarching messages in the Owl House is that you're not a burden. It's showcased in the form of Ida with her curse and her pushing others away as a result of it. It's shown through Amity's arc, where she learns what healthy relationships are like through Luz, and how she doesn't need to prove that she's useful to be worthy of respect and care. It's shown through Hunter's arc as well, as he learns he doesn't need to prove his value to Bellows. And finally, it's there with Luz and Camila. Luz feels that she's a burden to her mother because she causes her to worry about her future and progress in school when that isn't the case. This is a common sentiment that a lot of disabled people feel, especially when society tells them directly that they're a burden for being different or for needing help. The system that is put in place and the people who control it may feel that way and think that way, but that doesn't mean that it's correct, nor does it mean that the people who matter in your life feel that way. Communication is something that many people have an issue with, and actions can sometimes be confusing without an explanation provided alongside it. This is why Ida lived a better part of her life being ashamed of her curse, and it only became more manageable once her mother apologized for making her feel that way and telling her that she loves her regardless. The same thing is applicable to really anyone in the show. Camila may not know that Luz feels this way, and so she may not think to give further explanation on the decision outside of, "It's what's best for you." If Luz claims that she understands, a safe conclusion to reach would be that further discussion on the matter isn't needed. A mistake in communication is as simple as that. A mistake in communication, of which I feel most people aren't really that great at in general. We can tell that attempting to change Luz and make her normal was never the end goal either, as in the episode Yesterday's Lie, she does have both concern and sadness when in reaction to thinking that Luz has changed drastically due to camp, when in reality, she hadn't, and it was just that V was taking her place and being a different person entirely. When V throws away Luz's belongings, claiming that she's grown out of them, Camila even goes and retrieves the items to save them.
What's the box for me, huh?
Just cleaning up a little.
Even this? You used to love making me tinfoil swans.
Oh, I'm just looking for a fresh start. Cam taught me a lot, you know?
Yes, it sure did.
Boop. Mom, are you there?
Huh? Luz? I didn't even hear you call.
You can tell that she's sentimentally attached to these items, the swan in particular, and that's because Luz made them. She loved her daughter so much as she was and didn't want her to change. Learning boundaries and how to appropriately interact with others is not changing who you are. It's just asking you to be considerate of who they are as a person and not asking them to change so long as who they are isn't actively dangerous. Which, yes, neurodivergent kids can struggle with doing. It would make sense that Luz would need help with that from an outside source. And again, this doesn't make Camila abusive. I think a lot of the time when kids are told that they're making others uncomfortable, they think in a very self-centered way and believe it's the other person's problem and not theirs. And while this is true to a certain extent and applicable in the case of certain actions that are actively unharmful, it's not true in others. And this is coming from an autistic adult, but to an extent it is your responsibility to learn boundaries and not make other people uncomfortable if it isn't necessary. I understand that we sometimes do things accidentally due to the nature of our disability, but that does not absolve us of blame. If you're continually making somebody uncomfortable and they've told you that they are, but you've made no effort to change your behavior, there's a problem there. You're still accountable for your actions, and I feel like especially recently, people don't want to acknowledge that and use their disability as a scapegoat. Now, if it's something like a verbal tic that's truly uncontrollable, I'm obviously not referring to that. But for example, if somebody tells you that they're uncomfortable with a subject that you're talking about, being neurodivergent does not physically make you incapable of respecting their boundaries and stopping your discussions involving it. Using your disability or mental illness as an excuse and as a get-out-of-jail-free card is not acceptable behavior. And again, I don't really put a lot of blame on children for behaving this way, because again, they're children. They're allowed more leeway than adults to learn because the world and interacting with others is still fairly new for them. Hell, adults are still constantly learning and growing. That's why I think it's important for us to have conversations like this about media that provokes these types of fandom reactions, because it's a learning opportunity. You can't expect somebody to know these things right out of the gate, and a helping hand is sometimes necessary for clarity. There was also the argument that because Camila didn't recognize that V wasn't her daughter, that it proved that she didn't know or actually love Luz, which just isn't true. A perfect physical replica of her daughter came home, voice and all, and she wasn't aware of the demon realm at the time. What would be more plausible to you if you were in her position? That camp changed your daughter's behavior, or that a demon was impersonating her? If you were unaware of and didn't believe that magic existed, you would rightfully assume that camp was the cause of that change. And regardless of that talking point, Camila did notice that something was different about Luz. And no, she wasn't necessarily happy about it, as mentioned previously with the swan and Luz's other belongings. Now, we're going to move further into the episode Yesterday's Lie to address the main problem that people claimed that they had with this episode, the ending.
I'm trying to hold it together. I really am, but I have never been this scared before. The demon realm? Magic?
I've learned so much. Staying here was the best decision I ever made.
You chose to stay there?
Oh,
Were you trying to live out some witch fantasy? Did you hate living with me that much?
Mama, no!
No. When you come home, promise you'll stay here. I didn't mean to push you away. I swear things will be different.
Mom, it's not you. It never was.
Promise me, Luz. Please.
Okay, Mom. I promise.
At the end of the episode, Camila discovers that her actual daughter is in the demon realm, and a demon has actually been in her place and assuming her physical form this entire time. She finds out that Luz never went to camp, but instead essentially has been trapped in a different dimension for the entire summer, and she has no way of leaving. Understandably, she doesn't have a good reaction to it. When Luz is being tugged away by Ida, King, and Hootie, Camila makes her promise that she'll make it safely back to Connecticut and stay there with her. Luz promises that she will before being sucked back in and losing contact with her mother. Now, there's several reactions that people had to this scene, but the one I'm going to be talking about here is where people claim that Camila is guilt-tripping Luz into staying in the human realm with her. Now, let's take a look at the definition of guilt-tripping. The definition of guilt-tripping someone is to make someone feel guilty, especially in order to induce them to do something that isn't their responsibility or fault. And while I can understand why people would read this interaction this way, that's not what's happening here. You need to look at this from Camila's perspective. Luz has just explained to her that she's stuck in a dangerous world with a colonizer who wants to kill her and demons that want to rip her to shreds. She's having life-threatening adventures on the regular, and it was so unbelievable that at first Camila thought it was just Luz's imagination. While her daughter is more than capable of taking care of herself, she hasn't seen her or what she's capable of. Her 14-year-old daughter, emphasis on the age 14, is stuck in a realm that's unfamiliar to her and people she's unfamiliar with, and she has no way of protecting her or making sure that she's safe. Which, is kind of the job of a parent. She has no idea what this role is like outside of what Luz has told her, which was likely an incredibly brief SparkNotes version of what had actually happened, given how she didn't have a lot of time to explain since they were attempting to save V from Ronaldo 2.0. What Camila was doing here was not guilt-tripping. She was being open and communicating with her daughter that she's scared for her safety and she doesn't like the fact that she's somewhere that she cannot physically reach and protect her in. She doesn't like the fact that Luz is on her own, at least as far as she's aware, and in constant danger. She states that she's scared for her and is likely worried that there's a very real possibility that she's never going to see her again. Camila's reaction is completely normal, and she is not attempting to guilt-trip her into leaving a place that she adores, instead to live with her where she's miserable. She is genuinely fearful and likely isn't aware of just how well Luz is doing there or how well she fits in, because again, she only knows what Luz has told her about the demon realm this far. She hasn't seen it, and she hasn't been there. She hasn't even met the people who are taking care of her. This is not an abusive or manipulative reaction to the situation. Begging her daughter to come home and not put herself in what Camila is under the impression of being a dangerous situation is not an abusive or illogical reaction. She is lacking the full context of the situation, and will likely change her tune if and when she actually visits the Boiling Isles and sees the life that Luz is building for herself. Because again, as her past reactions would indicate, she doesn't want Luz to be unhappy. There's also the fact that Camila asks Luz if living with her was really so bad to the point of her running away, and this isn't guilt-tripping either. It's a genuine question, and Camila is afraid that she's messed up her relationship with her daughter if it's gotten to the point of her running away. We don't know the situation between her and her presumed ex-husband, but her reaction may have had something to do with that. If he left and/or divorced her because he didn't want to live with her, I could see how that could be a logical conclusion that she would jump to. A genuine question and confrontation is actually healthy communication rather than guilt-tripping. Because if her behavior is what caused her to leave, then that's something that can change so that she'll want to stay. Wanting to change your behavior if you find out it's harmful is a healthy reaction. It isn't an unhealthy one. Luz even verbally states that it wasn't her mother who was the problem. Additionally, the term guilt-tripping on its own implies that the situation that Luz is in isn't her fault, which it is her fault. Well, to an extent. She does decide to stay there and not tell her mother the truth, so yes, that part is her fault. She had multiple opportunities to both go home and tell her mother what was going on. Not being able to go back to the human realm isn't her fault, but she does still shoulder some of that responsibility for her current situation. And honestly, she is very aware of at least that much and feels guilty about it. A common theme in modern shows that I'm not really too fond of is the othering of parental figures. This isn't a problem that's new or only exclusive to other fantasy shows, but the shows always have one thing in common. They always make it seem as if the parent is always in the wrong and the child is always in the right. You hardly ever see the situation from the parent's perspective. This is why I appreciate the Owl House so much with Camila, because you're seeing it from the parent's perspective. It's not a good thing that these kids are running off and not telling their parents what's happening. Of course, in certain contexts, yes, it is a good thing that the kids are getting out of abusive situations, but Luz was not in an abusive situation, and I appreciate it so much that you have characters like V that call this type of thing out. A case of actual guilt tripping would be, for example, if somebody invites you to a party, but you can't go either due to a sudden change in plans or because you're sick and their response is, "Hardly anyone is coming already. No one wants to see me. Why am I even bothering to have this party at all? I guess I'll just cancel it." That's a situation in which it isn't your responsibility that other people decided not to go, but the person in question is making you feel as if it's your fault that nobody is going to be there and is trying to pressure you into going despite your conflicting plans. It's not your responsibility to make this person happy, and it certainly isn't your fault that other people couldn't go. That would be an accurate form of guilt tripping. Another example using characters from the show would be if, let's say, Odalia was upset with Amity for disobeying her, and in order to retain the control that she has over her, she says something to the effect of, "It's such a shame that you couldn't come to tonight's event, Amity. We needed somebody to showcase the abominations, and we couldn't find anyone to take your place. Now sales are likely going to suffer because of your absence. Oh well, I guess your father is just going to have to work even harder in his next project to make up for the lack of sales." In this case, that would be guilt tripping because it isn't Amity's responsibility to make her parents' business succeed. As the adults and owner of the business, it's their responsibility to either find a replacement or another method to sell their product. It isn't Amity's responsibility, but making her feel guilty enough to do something that she doesn't want to do is a form of guilt tripping. People also tend to confuse gaslighting with guilt tripping. And while it is true that an abuser may try to use both tactics in trying to control and abuse their victim, they are not the same. Gaslighting is when you manipulate somebody by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. An example would be a partner doing something abusive and then denying it happened, while also convincing the other person that they're being too emotional or overreacting to a situation that they're actually reacting appropriately to. If you wanted a perfect example of this, the relationship between Tuca and Kara from the show Tuca and Birdie perfectly showcases this form of abuse happening. Kara gives Tuca a gift in the form of a pin for her fanny pack whenever they have an argument, and then consistently tells her that she's overreacting to the hurtful statements and belittlement that she consistently and constantly puts Tuca through. She also denies that she isn't putting effort into the relationship and claims that she's just busy because she's a nurse, when in actuality she wants all of that effort changing to be on Tuca's end. She's a jerk to Speckle and Birdie at the fair, and instead of owning up to the fact that she's being a jerk because she just doesn't like sharing her time with Tuca and is possessive to the point of a toxic degree, she blames it on work and claims that Tuca is overreacting and wouldn't understand since she's unemployed. That isn't what guilt tripping is. Guilt tripping, again, is to make someone feel guilty, especially in order to induce them to do something that isn't their responsibility or fault. They're both manipulation tactics, which may sometimes be used in tandem, but they are not the same. Back to Camila, but none of her reactions seem particularly unfair to me, nor do they seem like cases of guilt tripping or gaslighting. To recap the entirety of the situation to put it in perspective, her daughter was not aware of and didn't respect the boundaries of other students, and so action needed to be taken when physical harm came to 2 students and her principal as a direct result of her behavior. She did this because there was a very real concern that Luz would continue to have no friends and get herself into dangerous situations, and not because she wanted her daughter to change into a normal person. If Luz's behavior continued, it could also be a very real possibility that Luz would be taken away or corrected more harshly outside of Camila's direct control. When she discovers that a demon has been living under her roof and her actual daughter is stuck in a realm of demons that can very easily kill her, she begs for Luz to come home and stay where it's safe and not to leave her behind. She tells her that she's scared and asks if the reason that she left is because she was miserable living with her. She wanted to know if she failed as a parent and she wasn't attempting to guilt trip or gaslight her. And while it is worth mentioning that people can sometimes be abusive unintentionally and without even realizing it, again, I don't believe this to be this case in this particular situation. I guess I can understand how people can confuse the unfair situation of a forced summer camp to be potentially abusive behavior, but given the context, it's very clear that that wasn't the case. Luz is even surprised to learn that V had made friends with other weird people at camp, implying that it was far worse in her head than it was in reality. While the advertisement certainly did look less than ideal, the weird kids still came out weird, just with friends and likely better social skills. The entire point is that being weird isn't a bad thing, it's just bad when you aren't respecting the boundaries of other people or being respectful towards them. And honestly, that isn't really a bad message to give or goal to strive for. Fandom spaces seem to be very anti-recovery and anti-self-betterment, and it's something that I really cannot in good conscience approve of or validate. There's also the fact that Camila played along with what she thought to be Luz's game, implying that this was something that she did rather frequently with Luz in the past given how into it she seemed. She was also having fun up until she started to become scared and realized that it wasn't just her daughter's imagination or her tendency to live in her own fantasy world at play. She welcomes a demon into her home and protects her on Luz's word alone without even knowing of her past or what she's capable of. She holds it together until the immediate danger is over and Luz is about to be torn away from her. Camila is a good mom. That's why V is frustrated with and resents her, because she threw all of that away just so she could go on and live a life with no constraints, living in a real-life fantasy world. Luz made a mistake, and the reaction to that mistake was justified and completely within healthy and understandable boundaries. And that's why, again, Camila Noceda is a good mom. And if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon to be notified of when I upload. Special thank you to my top tier patrons: Ambrose Rothwood, Jeffy Games, Brandon Nunes, The Lovely Ghosty, Sadin Suzuki, Charlotte Allen, Lee Taylor, and Zachary Ansley. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.